Okay. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the WCAPS Global Peace and Security Learning Exchange. On behalf of women of color advancing peace, security, and conflict transformation, thank you for joining us for this important conversation that continues to drive forward WCAPS's mission of providing resources to women of color in our wider community. The Global Peace and Security Learning Exchange was created to foster connection, knowledge sharing, and access for emerging and established professionals alike. Through initiatives like these, WCAPS continues its commitment to demystifying career pathways and ensuring that women of color are not only represented in peace and security spaces, recognized as leaders, innovators, and change makers within them, but also learning the valuable tools needed to navigate within these spaces. Today's session offers an opportunity to hear directly from a global health professional, Julie Fischer, who has navigated complex career journeys across this sector, culminating with a position at Georgetown University. She will provide more details on her career journey during our time together. We hope this discussion provides practical insight, honest reflection, and meaningful encouragement for those exploring how to build impactful careers in this field. As we engage today, we encourage everyone to approach this space with curiosity, collaboration, and community in mind. The connections formed here are just as valuable as the information shared. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to an engaging and inspiring discussion. Julie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak with this group and to engage with WCAPS, whose leadership have been so instrumental in ensuring not only representation of women of color and of women generally in some of the most important discussions of peace and security globally, but to drawing attention to diverse career pathways and the many ways in which we can collectively improve the organizations and the instruments that let us achieve goals in global peace and security. So I'm going to go ahead and describe my career pathway with the caveat up front that many of the choices that I'm going to describe and the pathways I'm going to describe are not well-worn, obvious pathways that are um, highly recognized in an academic career or are not pathways that are immediately obvious. So I'm going to describe these experiences because they're varied. And I'm hoping that in describing these experiences and how I came to some of them, we can have a conversation among us here about different types of opportunities and that we can have a very interactive um, dialogue about what some of the challenges are given the current environment for global health. So my background is in microbiology and immunology. I have a very traditional laboratory training at the graduate level. I got a PhD in microbiology and immunology. Um, in which I worked on understanding viral pathology, which is or viral pathogenesis. So understanding why some viruses cause very severe disease in some hosts, but not in others. And I worked in a couple of different viral models. One understanding respiratory syncytial virus, which is a very common respiratory virus that affects uh, infants and children most significantly, although we are infected throughout our lives worldwide. And I worked in a model of understanding rapid disease progression and slow disease progression in HIV/AIDS in an animal model with a hybrid virus. My work was at the bench was as a graduate student and a postdoc, really focused on lab techniques and understanding how these viruses cause disease in different hosts by looking at immunomodulatory factors, looking at viral factors, looking at other host factors. And I did that work with an anticipation initially that I would continue on a very traditional research career, that I would get a PhD, get a postdoc, find a laboratory, and eventually end up being a primary investigator of my own laboratory. But I had some opportunities during my postdoctoral work and my graduate work that identified to me that while I'm very interested in the science and committed to understanding the science itself, that I had interests in how decisions made outside of the laboratory affected the environment for scientific research. Um, how the decisions that were being made in totally different sectors created either opportunities to expand research or limited opportunities to protect populations. I also became involved in the question of how we train scientists of the future. While a postdoc, I had the opportunity, sort of involuntary opportunity initially, to represent my organization, Seattle Biomedical Research Institute, which was affiliated with the University of Washington, and which is where I conducted my postdoctoral fellowship. I had the opportunity to become involved in community education, specifically looking at opportunities for teachers at the K through 12 level to become more sophisticated in conducting scientific research, in understanding the scientific process, and in introducing it into their classrooms. Through that opportunity, I became involved in community organizations, including Expanding Your Horizons and Horizons Unlimited, which are both programs that seek to engage girls at the middle school age in science and STEM generally, science, technology, engineering, and math, through either one-day science events or through more engaged opportunities for mentorship in science with people who look like them. Um, I had the opportunity through that then to become involved in some work in Seattle, which is where I was working for my postdoc. And I took advantage of the opportunities to become involved in citywide public policy making around science, which involved some work with school board subcommittees, advisory committees for local biotech academies, and generally learning more about the education pipeline, how training the scientific workforce of the future starts at the youngest ages of education. That really piqued my interest in doing something outside of the laboratory. I applied for a AAAS Science and Technology Fellowship. So that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which manages fellowships both in the executive branch of the United States government and in Congress. And I was lucky enough to um, be awarded a fellowship to work in Congress for a year. I worked for the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, which doesn't sound initially like a health position, but it is an incredibly um, dynamic. It's a place where the intersection of science and policy is dynamic and immediate. So when in the US, people choose to serve in the active duty military, we make a commitment as a country that we will ensure that if they come to harm during their active duty service, that there will be care while they are on active duty and afterwards when they are veterans of service. And the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs and its committee counterpart on the House side had to answer a lot of questions to form US law and policy, including whether specific conditions could be presumptively connected to exposures during military service based on the best available science, which is often limited and indirect. I worked for a year in that role as a fellow and then was asked to stay on the committee as professional staff for an additional 2 years. After that, I actually took a fellowship in a different area altogether with the Council on Foreign Relations as a policy fellow, because as a scientist, I learned a lot at the bench about how to transfer small quantities of liquid from one tube to another and how to ask good questions for hypothesis-driven research, but I didn't have a lot of opportunities to learn formally about policy. And the Council on Foreign Relations Fellowship gave me an opportunity to explore how policy professionals conduct qualitative analysis and what they see as driving the same kind of investigator curiosities that scientists have, but looking at policy developments rather than observable biological phenomena. So I was a Council on Foreign Relations fellow. From there, I went to work As a contractor at the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, US CDC, um, out of the office that is part of the Ministry of Public Health, the Thai Ministry of Public Health, US CDC collaboration. That is a now more than 40-year-old, almost 50-year-old collaboration that seeks to increase partnerships between the Thai Ministry of Public Health, the US government, and other regional partners to accelerate the ability to detect disease outbreaks, respond effectively, and prevent them from spreading. I did that for 3 years working in Thailand. And then since then, I have worked in a think tank. I have worked in a think tank in Washington, D.C. as the director of the Global Health Security Program at the Stimson Center, which is a nonpartisan center that seeks to enhance peace and security. I have worked in universities, George Washington University and now Georgetown University, either full or part-time, um, conducting research, teaching, and supporting degree programs. Right now, I'm in a course director in the master's program in biohazardous threat agents at Georgetown. And I have worked as an implementer. So I have worked in a nonprofit called CRDF Global as the first technical director of global health in CRDF Global. So through those experiences, I have had experiences as an academic, as an implementer in the nonprofit sector supporting the US government, and as a direct contractor of the US government. I would say through those pathways, my lessons observed are that your technical training is absolutely critical, whatever it is, to forming the discipline with which you approach questions, and sometimes to the actual work that you are doing, particularly if you choose to go into an area such as epidemiology or disease control, um, disaster preparedness, and response. Um, if you are working in an area that is specifically technical, your technical background is important. But I have also learned that the other skills that you develop along the way through working in teams, through conducting research, the the skills that are part of hypothesis-driven research or that are part of academic training are also absolutely critical to being able to understand the drivers that affect how decisions are made. And many areas in global health are highly interdisciplinary to start with. So your technical skills are critical, but so are the technical skills of people in different fields. And all of your expertise, your teamwork, and your problem-solving abilities together are critical to being able to identify not just the proximate causes of threats to global health, but the underlying causes. I would say I have learned that one of the most important things in this field is to be able to continually redefine oneself because global health is not static. Not only do the threats continue to evolve in new populations and new areas, and new tools are needed to confront them, but the political environment and the policy environment for global health are also quite volatile. And so understanding, being able to see the bigger picture and understand what skills you bring, not just to present yourself as an expert with a collection of techniques or a collection or an array of specific knowledge, but as someone who's very capable of learning, adapting, and continuing to evolve professionally and adapt to the ecosystem in which you find yourself is absolutely critical. So being able to think of yourself as capabilities and to market yourself that way. When you're looking at positions in which you may not have had previous experience, but you certainly feel that you can bring the skills needed to take on new challenges. And then finally, I think that the my biggest lesson of my professional career is that if you have the opportunity to be kind, you should be kind, and there is always the opportunity to be kind. It's important to mentor and to seek mentors, and it's sometimes difficult in global health to find the people who have found those opportunities. I think the good thing about global health specifically for this audience for women of color, is that global health is an area in which um, the leadership is diverse and there are opportunities um, that um, are not limited to people who come from specific socioeconomic strata who they're not there. It's there's less of an old boys network around global health and more opportunities because the skills needed are so diverse and vast. And because the geography that's affected is literally global, it's the world. That said, finding mentors and sponsors is absolutely critical to having a sustained career in global health. And that means if you are interested in pursuing a career in global health or looking at career pathways in global health, thinking about the many diverse career pathways, working in government agencies that directly conduct either laboratory testing, epidemiology, or other analysis to develop public health policy and implement public health policy. Looking at non-governmental organizations that span a huge range from those that are essentially force multipliers for governments that actually implement projects, um, conduct technical planning, technical projects, and community outreach to those who are on the other end of the spectrum, really advocates for good policy and for um, affected populations. And then finally, so governmental agencies, non-governmental agencies, academia as an extension of non-governmental sector, where most of the focus is on research, but academic organizations also do a lot of training and workforce development for global health outside of formal classroom settings. And then finally, the private sector, which in the current environment is playing an increasing role in global health activities the um, as the US government and international partners change the shape of their interaction with some of the countries and the populations that are most affected by both acute infectious disease threats and by longer term chronic disease threats, including neglected tropical diseases. So the private sector is increasingly um, playing a role in engaging with academic partners, with non-governmental partners, and with governmental partners, whether it's introducing technologies, treatments, and preventive interventions that have been developed commercially, or looking at how to create um, capabilities in countries and regions around the world to basically adapt technologies and use them locally. So that is my, I apologize if that was a very fast roundup, but that is sort of my career pathway and how I see it relating to where we are currently in global health. And I'm hoping that some of you have questions or observations about careers in global health that you would like to bring to the conversation.
Thank you, Julie, for telling us all about your professional journey. It sounds very storied and interesting. As someone who doesn't have a sciencey background, I always love hearing from our science-minded partners because it really puts into perspective a lot of the work that we do on our side. So as you were working through your career, I know that you touched on some of the interactions that you've had with public policy, but what was the biggest collaborative lesson you learned about bringing your sciencey side to the policy side?
That's an excellent question. I think that there's a couple of lessons learned. I mean, I think one, um, going all the way back to when I worked on the Hill in the US government. When I worked for a Senate committee, I happened to work for a Senate committee during, I'm going to date myself, 20 years ago, plus now, during uh, the 9/11 attacks on the US, and for the purposes of biology, what followed about a month afterwards, which was the release of anthrax, um, in the US against targets in the US Congress. Um, what I learned then was having the technical background is incredibly important for two reasons. One, credibility. Being able to bring the science to questions of policy, particularly when there is a lot of pressure to make policy quickly, and that was a time when the US Congress was um, shocked, assaulted in its own safe space, and felt the need to take action quickly. Being able to come in with credible science background and say, here's what we can know, here's what we cannot know, here's where um, actions can be effective at identifying maybe the potential perpetrator, at identifying where there may be similar threats that could be addressed and secured. And here's where taking action might do more harm than good in the long term in developing countermeasures. Being able to bring the science background with awareness of the levers of policy was absolutely critical. So um, it's on a day-to-day basis. I have not used the science that I know most thoroughly, the science, the technical knowledge that I learned in my postdoctoral work, for example. I don't use it on a daily basis, but the understanding of how to read and interpret science and how to train myself quickly to be able to answer technical questions has been invaluable. I think the other place is that um, it's really important to be able to pair strong scientific people with strong scientific background and people with a stronger sense of whatever the larger ecosystem is for policy. In global health, it's generally understanding in a specific country or a specific community um, who the people are, who the leaders are, who are best positioned to understand that community's vulnerabilities and its strengths. Um, who are best positioned to be able to communicate about um, opportunities to craft programs or to make policies that will help guide people's behaviors to make good decisions, to protect themselves, and to be able to find trusted information. So I think one of the things I learned was being able to bring my sciencey background um, and my understanding of policy to those who are in the best position to build trust, to build networks, and to understand what the opportunities were for interventions, so that any interventions we introduced were based in solid science, in work that we could reproduce, in work that was based on the best available evidence, but that also was grounded in larger networks and in trust building and in community networks and in an understanding of the policy levers available at the national level and below. I hope that answered the question.
Very much so, and has spawned a follow-up.
Okay.
Um, so just there at the end of your response, you mentioned that all of this was at the national level. So
Mm-hmm.
as you were working in these spaces, what challenges did you have in navigating the solid science, as you called it, with the local context of where a lot of these interventions and policies would be being lived out, especially on a global stage, like outside of a cultural context that you're familiar with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I've also been had the privilege to be part of the Global Health Security Agenda Consortium for the past, well, since its founding in 2014, which is a coalition of a voluntary coalition of non-governmental organizations that support um, the implementation of the Global Health Security Agenda, which is in turn an effort to help countries develop the networks to and exchange the resources to prevent, detect, and respond effectively to disease outbreaks. And WCAPS was one of the founding members of the GHSA consortium. So there's a long partnership there. I would say at the national level, I'm going to go back to work that I was able to do as a contractor in support of the US CDC in Thailand a long time ago. And then my organization that where I headed, where I was the technical director for global health, CRDF Global did similar work for CDC over the past few years. One of the things we found is the biggest obstacle is that it's easy to say, um, this is the evidence-based action based on work done in other countries or based on global research or based on published data. But until you can tie that to really local needs, it's often very difficult to get decision makers who are looking at a lot of competing priorities, um, priorities that are immediate and often politically charged, to look at the need to prepare for an event that hasn't happened yet, or to deal with, say, risks to a population that, like, frankly, women and children who are often not the most vocal or powerful people in an economy. So here's a couple of examples. When I was working with the US CDC and the Thai Ministry of Public Health, one of the actions that I had the privilege to support was developing capacity for high throughput, high quality diagnostics in a network of about 20 hospitals. We looked at what had happened in the past because the the need was to help decision makers, policymakers, choose pathways like investing in vaccination for vulnerable populations against common causes of pneumonia or against common causes of sepsis. We could look at global. I apologize, my dog is losing his mind. We could look at global data and say, well, we know that children nationally, um, we know that children globally are very susceptible to these common causes of pneumonia, or that elderly people are often susceptible, that these cause outbreaks, that they cause hospitalizations, they cause deaths, and that ultimately, and many of them are preventable. So we could say this is based on global data. But until we could build the capacity locally for high throughput, high quality testing, that was all very hypothetical. So for me, that was a place where the Thai experts and their partners in the US government and in other international organizations could say, okay, what is the data we need to tie this impact at the local level and this impact at the national level to real evidence? And as collaboratively, what we determined was, well, the laboratories aren't sustainably testing for those causes of pneumonia and sepsis right now at the community level. So they're not seen as a real risk. And it doesn't really drive a demand for investment in, say, vaccines to prevent Streptococcus pneumoniae, which is a bacterial cause of pneumonia that is very common globally. So the US government and the Thai government together decided to invest in better diagnostics. And I got to be part of building the laboratory capacity to conduct that high quality testing and to take the data and decide what it meant for the local the local population and for the national government. And then on a global level, to be part of a global network that was trying to understand what's happening above the national level. I would say the obstacles were trying to convince, for policy, trying to convince decision makers of the need to take action when they didn't have convincing data. And the opportunity was the ability to generate that data that was locally relevant and that had buy-in from local health leaders, because we engaged them from the very beginning in making the decisions about where testing would take place and how it would take place and who would get the data, which is the most important part. That they would get the data from this higher quality laboratory testing at the clinical level to improve their ability to care for patients and to manage cases, so that they could reliably have the information they needed to make care decisions, while relaying that decision up to public health officials at the national level, who could then say, okay, here's the data we need to understand the diseases that are causing pneumonia and sepsis in our population locally, to be able then to model what would happen if we had better interventions, and to be able to advocate to the decision makers who make budgets, who make policies, who make laws, to say, we really need to think about how we invest in these interventions to save lives in the long run, and to sustain gains in improving health. So it was what I learned was you can't take general global data and convince a national level decision maker to take action. You really have to generate good data, and that requires people who have the right combinations of scientific and technical training, who have a good understanding of local context and who have the networks and connections to really be able to engage local communities to generate the data and then to know who can use it effectively. Um, more recently, I've done similar work in support of the US CDC through funding from CDC with my team from CRDF Global in the Middle East, North Africa region. And one of the things we realized there very quickly through our hub, which is in Amman, Jordan, is that if local decision makers weren't interested in the data, you can't come in from the outside without external funding and say, this is the research you should do. You really have to develop those strong relationships and partnerships with your counterparts, Ministry of Health counterparts, scientific counterparts, emergency preparedness and response counterparts, and put the time into collecting locally relevant data. For example, to understand in Jordan, we initiated a project where my very multidisciplinary, very capable team in Jordan, um, led by a woman who used to be the director of the Central Public Health Laboratory, Jordan, was able to engage with Ministry of Health and then with hospital leadership to conduct what are called point prevalence surveys, which is basically capturing at a single moment in time what is happening with antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship at the ward level in hospitals. And by doing that in 5 hospitals in Jordan, including one of the largest teaching hospitals, including one of the largest public hospitals in Jordan, we were able to not just say, hey, AMR is a big problem globally. You have a national strategy. What can we do to support your national strategy? We were able to say, hey, we have some specific expertise we can bring to the table. You understand where the needs are and where the questions need to be asked about what's really happening at the ground, at a granular level. And through that partnership, we were able to collect really specific data. And we learned, like in 5 different hospitals, that some of the root causes of antimicrobial resistance were unique to that setting, which is gave the Ministry of Health information they need to craft their long-term planning. It was useful feedback for the clinicians on the ground to understand where they might need to do more awareness building and training. Um, and it allowed the international partners to see where they could help most effectively instead of just coming in with donor-driven priorities. So that's sorry, I spilled a lot of information at once there, but I think it all comes down to understanding local partners, bringing the right scientific expertise that's credible from the outside, um, where it's possible, and ensuring that you have locally relevant data for action, because it's all know your own, know your epidemic was a long slogan of PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Research and associated global AIDS programs, and it remains true really in every context. Know your own challenges, know your own epidemic, and gather your own data.
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer. And I have just two last questions about global health and security. Um, One is reflecting on the work that you have done in global health and not only the preparedness piece, but also in the response. What do you see as the most pressing global health security challenge today? And then the second is, what can future global health leaders learn and carry forward with them as we continue to see an increasing number of global health crises?
So the biggest challenge facing global health today, I think that a lot of it at this moment globally springs from the backlash seen in many societies across the world in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and the response to the pandemic. I think there's a lot of reinvention of history happening in real time, particularly as at this year, the last year with the 5-year anniversary of the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of soul searching about what the global health community and the public health community at the national and local level did well and where actions could have been communicated better or perhaps potentially modulated more effectively. That's all retrospective. It's easy to say in retrospect what you could have done better. At the time, public health actors and the global health community did the best they could with the data they had, with the assumption that the goal was to save the maximum number of lives possible. To me, one of the biggest challenges we face right now is that um, everyone who experienced the pandemic, young people, professionals, older people, um, who found their lives and livelihoods impacted, um, have different memories of how that affected them. And for many people in societies across the world, it has elicited a sort of backlash against public health. Um, Often framed as the idea that if you're not worried about outbreaks and you don't detect them and you don't conduct disease surveillance to see signs of emerging infectious diseases and you don't take action to contain that, then epidemics and pandemics won't affect people's daily lives, which is clearly a mismatch. But it's a lot of it is just pushback. Um, Clearly, lockdowns did not make anyone happy. And so we see a lot of backlash now against the idea of public health in general, associated primarily with the memory of lockdowns during COVID-19. So, one of the biggest challenges is resistance in societies across the world to the idea of public health action, which is born of a backlash to the experiences during COVID, the lived experiences of COVID-19 pandemic. And we're seeing now with like for example, the news coverage of the hantavirus outbreak on the expedition cruise that has affected people from across the world, that the need for international cooperation and for facing those issues, frankly, is as great as it ever has been. But there's many broken connections born out of that backlash, which include actions by the US government to withdraw from collaboration with WHO, which has cascaded to some other countries. So I think the biggest challenge is backlash and um, the breakdown of some previously strong assumptions and norms around global health information sharing, cooperation, and collaboration. And I am so sorry, Andy, what was your second question?
The second question was looking at what future leaders in global health
Mm,
should kind of stick to as a lightning rod, if you will, for how they're dealing with crises in their time.
yeah. So thank you. That's an excellent question as well. I think the for people who are currently global health leaders, my message is, my observation of my message is all that work is critically needed, and the need to enhance systems to prevent the accidental or deliberate release of disease. That we need all those systems. We need the ability to detect outbreaks rapidly so that we can respond to them while they are still relatively limited before they spill across populations and borders. The need is still there, even if the political drivers are different than they were 5 years ago, a decade ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. A lot of the most effective work right now is happening as global health revisits its own architecture. Um, a lot of the most effective work is happening at the subnational level. So in the US, equivalent would be state and local, prefectural, provincial, county, regional, depending on the structure of a country. Um, the expertise is needed, the work is needed. It's just not as obvious right now about how to get into those career pathways and how to have a sustainable career pathway. But the workforce is desperately needed. It's just being supported at different levels. So I think right now, my advice for people who are looking at careers in global health, and particularly careers in global health security, is that we are in a period of profound disruption and upheaval globally. There's no really gentle way to say it. The funding climate is profoundly perturbed or disturbed from what it was a few years ago. And we don't understand quite yet how that will settle out. But we do know that there's an absolute desperate need for people who understand um, not just public health, but health security, which is really the intersection, between um, public health, biosecurity, policy, security drivers, and humanitarian drivers. So the need is there. There are populations at risk. There are actors trying to respond. But right now, the weight of that response may be at the national level and the subnational level, and with like state level governments or equivalent, and with decision makers in governments outside the United States, with international and local organizations that are looking at how to implement programs on behalf of communities and on behalf of governments. So I think that right now it's easy to look at global health and be discouraged, partly because so many institutions fundamentally reshaped over the last year that there are lots of people with extensive experience competing for entry-level jobs. But this is going to shake out because the needs are still there, and it's a matter of seeing where, as the systems and the global health architecture sort of gel again, where the critical players and the resources end up being. And I would say right now the need is still there, which means we still need to be doing professional development and developing a pipeline of people who are ready to be global health security professionals. Um, if we look in 5 or 10 years, not if, but when the next major public health event happens worldwide, and we don't have trained people to respond, um, we will be worse off, markedly worse off than we were before the emergence of events like the Ebola virus disease crisis in West Africa in 2014 to 2016, or the COVID pandemic, or the other events that we see as being profoundly disruptive. We have to have that workforce. And I think the question right now is where individuals have ties to communities or governments or organizations that can continue to support the work, even as the global flow of funds for health security activities is in a bit of um, a, a tumult.
Okay, thank you so much for those responses. Shifting gears a little bit as we reflect on the comments that you made earlier about the importance of mentorship. What has been the most rewarding part of mentoring students and young professionals?
Oh, the most rewarding parts are seeing students and young professionals who are capable and bright and brilliant and driven become confident and become leaders and mentors and strike out on their own. I mean, it's the seeing seeing young professionals gain in confidence and gain in seniority is the goal of every mentor should be to provide a safe space for learning um, where younger, earlier career professionals can test their abilities and know that there's someone there to answer their questions and to help them if they are unsure or if something doesn't work as they expected it to. It's creating a safe place for those students and early career professionals to try new things and to have a backup to help them if they run into risks that they hadn't anticipated or if something doesn't work as they hoped. So for me, the most rewarding part is creating that safe space. And I know that that safe space is created when I see my students going on and um, trying new things and starting new programs and just having the bravery to go do something big and new. So I'm old enough now that some of the people I've mentored are in their own faculty positions and have their own teams, and that to me is the biggest reward of all is seeing someone else start a team and create a positive space for new trainees. Um, that's the reward. To know that you've created a safe space for someone who then can create a safe space for others.
That's beautiful. And speaking of things of beauty, what is one piece of career advice you wished you had received earlier on in your own journey?
Um, I wish someone had told me that um, there is no set pathway to success, and that you need to. I wish someone had said to me, think about where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, and think about the networks as well as the skills you need to be in that place. I did start off from a very traditional academic training, and there was this expectation that um, in academic training, you're getting on a boat basically, and you're going down a river. You're going to get a master's or a doctorate, and that's going to take you along the river to the next place. And then that river is going to carry you into some sort of postdoctoral training or fellowship, and then that fellowship is going to carry you into academia, and that there's only really one path forward in the river. And if you stepped away, if you stepped onto the bank, then you can't ever catch up again. The river's passing you by, you've lost where you're going. And that's really not true in the world, particularly the world of security and security policy, because um, the need, the what you need to know is so varied and so different in disciplines that the idea that you can only like there's only one way to get there is kind of crazy. So or is not true. I shouldn't say kind of crazy. It's just not true. So I wish someone had told me at the beginning not to be so worried about making the wrong decision on a career step or a job because it's not a river. It's like a wetland where you just keep coming, the little rivulets keep joining up again and again and again. And there's a lot of different ways to get where you're going. So I wish someone had said, think about where you want to be in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and think about what you want to know. What are the skills you need? Who are the people you would like to know? And then just take a chance on those people. And if it ends up like you enter a job and it's not great, it's it's not a flaw. It's not a poor decision you've made. You tried something. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you enter a career path with an or a job, a career opportunity with an idea, I'm going to get a critical skill I need to be where I want to be in 10 years or 15 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, then nothing you've done is a waste of time. It's all building you to be the you want to be, um, the 5 year away you and the 10 year away you and the mentor you. As long as you keep looking for the places you can get those skills, none of it's a waste of time.
Thank you so much for that response. My last question for you is, what continues to motivate and inspire you in your work today?
I get unreasonably excited about the opportunity to make something new. So what continues to inspire me is um, I'm going to go back to working with young people. I mean, one of the reasons I like to work in academia is, and actually this is true in implementing in global health as well, is there's always young people with new ideas um, and new ways of looking at the world. So what really inspires me is to hear about those new ways of looking at the world and to keep being able to shift worldview in what is possible and what is practical. So, right now in global health security, there's a lot of interest in seeing what we can do with new tools that are becoming available with AI, with apps, with information sharing, to overcome some of the limits that have historically allowed outbreaks to spread. So historically, one of the challenges is detecting diseases rapidly enough and establishing um, accurate, reliable, safe, secure, and timely laboratory testing, for example. The technology for diagnostic testing is advancing rapidly. AI tools and large language model tools are giving us more and more capability to really crunch through data rapidly. Um, and we hear the dire stories of AI is going to replace us all. I guess I'm a very glass half full optimistic person because my answer is AI can do some of the work that is time consuming and free us all as strategic and tactical thinkers to focus less on how can I crunch this massive amount of data and more on how can I ask better questions. So what really inspires me is the ability to take these new tools and think about what questions can we ask to move forward more quickly, and how can we use some of these new technologies to close gaps that we have struggled to fill for decades to accelerate our ability to detect diseases and to respond effectively.
Thank you. I'm a glass half full person for AI as well because it does take a lot of the tedium out of work. But I also, the other side of it is like the use of water, the way that it's upping people's electricity bills. There's a whole conversation on bad AI that can happen.
Yeah.
But that's not today's topic. So thank you so much, Julie, and to all of our participants for contributing to today's Global Peace and Security Learning Exchange. Today's conversation reminded us that careers in peace and security are rarely linear. They are not a river, they are a wetland, but they are strengthened by mentorship, community persistence, and a commitment to inclusive leadership. The insights shared today reflect the importance of creating spaces where women of color and our allies can access knowledge, build networks, and see pieces of their identity represented across every level of this field. We hope you leave this session with new ideas, valuable connections, i.e., if you want Julie's email address or LinkedIn, please let her know, and renewed confidence in your own professional journeys. Whether you are just beginning your career, transitioning into a new area, or continuing to grow as a leader, your voice, expertise, and perspective are essential to shaping more equitable and sustainable approaches to global peace and security. And in this case, global public health, which is important to all of us. We encourage you to stay engaged with WCAPS through future GPSLE sessions, chapter activities, mentorship opportunities, and other upcoming programs, such as our Collective Power Gala taking place in Washington, D.C. on June 25th. Thank you again for being a part of this community and for the work each of you contributes toward advancing peace, security, and conflict transformation around the world. We look forward to continuing this journey together.
Thank you for having me.